Today's podcast is going to be challenging and it's going to be encouraging. We're looking at Joseph's life when he comes face to face with the brothers whom he hasn't seen in 22 years, the very ones who threw him into a pit and sold him into a slavery are now coming face to face with Joseph, one of the most powerful men in all of Egypt. And it's a story of forgiveness. It's a picture of brothers being reunited, and it's a picture of Jesus, Yeshua's heart towards those who have rejected him. We are at one of the most riveting stories in all of the Bible. Nathan, as we look at our portions this week, which goes from Genesis 44:18 to 47:27, in Hebrew it's called Vayigash, but I say, oh my gosh, which has nothing to do with the Hebrew word, but has everything to do with how I feel when I consider that Joseph is coming face to face with his brothers. We talked a number of weeks ago about the angst that Jacob must have been feeling as he comes face to face with his brother Esau. Now we're having Joseph who is coming face to face with his brothers. And as I'm saying it, I'm actually thinking how the whole issue of Israel coming face to face with their elder brother, Yeshua, Jesus, is going to be the culmination really of the ages. That the story of the people of Israel is recognizing the brother and honoring the brother, and the brother who could have held everything against those who didn't recognize them, forgiving them and welcoming them back into the fold.
The story is absolutely unbelievable. It's so powerful. And we've kind of made those parallels, the sibling rivalries. Now, right, Joseph is second in command in all of Egypt, which Egypt is the world system at this point. They are the top dog, right?
Yeah.
And so he's second command to Pharaoh. Pharaoh has a dream. Joseph interprets it with God's help.
Yeah.
And now he's provided food through the season of famine that he prophesied based on the dream.
Yeah.
And Israel is supplied because they're coming to Egypt to receive supply, right? It's a picture of Israel going to the nations, right?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And then at the same time, the other nations are coming to Egypt to receive food. And because of Joseph's trust in God, his perseverance, and because he didn't quit in the midst of it, he was positioned to not only bless Israel, his own family, but to bless the nations. Now his brothers are there. They've come to receive, because there's a famine in the land back in Israel.
Yeah.
They've come to receive provision. They don't know Joseph is second in command. They have no clue. And as a matter of fact, as we start into this portion, they don't recognize him.
Yeah.
They don't recognize him. He looks like an Egyptian. He speaks Egyptian. He presents himself. But Joseph recognizes his brothers.
Wow.
And as he's seeing all this, he's now having to process, how am I going to handle this?
This is 22 years after these guys threw him in a pit, sold him into slavery, lied to their father about him, saying he was dead. And all that Joseph's been through in prison, we talked about this previously, where he's been forgotten, wrongly accused. Joseph has every right to be a bitter man.
Absolutely.
Bitter towards God, bitter towards his brothers, bitter towards Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, bitter towards the cupbearer. But this is a man who's been rejected and yet is still walking in a place of utter and complete superhuman, supernatural forgiveness. One of the most moving messages I ever heard was spoken by a man by the name of R.T. Kendall, who I had the privilege of having dinner with, maybe 25 years ago in London. And also Dr. Brown asked me to host a program for him. And so I had the joy of interviewing R.T. Kendall on the show, and amazing man, wrote a book called Total Forgiveness. But I'd love to just kind of highlight, in my own words, but certainly influenced by R.T. Kendall, some of the interesting parts of this story, and maybe we can discuss it from Genesis chapter 45. Friends, listen, I believe that seasons are coming where we are going to come face to face with those who've hurt us, face to face with those who rejected us, face to face with those who we have every right to want to have nothing to do with. But when we respond with God's attitude, rather than repelling them, we're going to have them come close. Rather than rejecting them, we're going to forgive them. Rather than hating them, we're going to love them. Why? Because we're capable of doing it? No, but because God, who does that for us, is capable through us of doing it for those who've hurt us. So let's just look at this. Genesis chapter 45. His brothers, like you said, did not recognize him. Verse 1 of chapter 45, Joseph is now facing these guys. Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried. I mean, imagine the emotion, the pent up emotion, seeing his blood brothers in front of him. And this is what he says. He says, have everyone go out from me, so that there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Now, just think about this for a second. If you have an opportunity to get even,
Right.
you're going to want everybody in the world to know,
Right.
these are the guys that hurt me. These are we live in a social media nightmare right now. What I call it is, what are those birds? Vultures. We have like these Christian vultures. One man has a fall, and do you know what? It's like the circling and the accusers and this. I'm not saying we shouldn't call sin. That's not what I'm saying.
Of course.
Joseph had every right now to make these guys' sins known before everyone. But look, he said, have everyone go out of the room. Yeah. R.T. Kendall said this. He said, you know you've forgiven when you no longer have to tell anyone what was done to you. Joseph could have loudly told the whole world right now, these are the guys. But when he chose to reveal himself to his brothers, he had everyone leave the room. I can't say what Joseph's motivation was, but it's not what I would have done. Yeah. I would have said, everybody, these are the guys. Let's post it on the internet. Yeah. Let's post it everywhere. These are the guys.
Look what they did to me.
Look what they did to me. How ought we to I mean, this is really remarkable.
It's unbelievable, and it's such a beautiful picture because you make the right point. He had the opportunity. It's not like he didn't have the option. He did have the option.
Right.
And he could have done the very opposite. Bring everybody in here. I want to make an announcement.
Yeah.
And we've in the chapters leading up to this moment, Joseph has had his moment of kind of, for lack of a better term, manipulating the situation and sending them back to their father and holding one of the brothers. He's kind of been trying, he hasn't confronted it directly, but he's working out his process of how do I deal with this?
Yes.
Well, now they're all there. They're all lined up, and he has the opportunity. And instead of exposing, he says, I need a minute. And it's powerful when you read it. I mean, the very next verse, he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. So they don't know what he said or what he was doing, but when they all left his presence, his weeping was so loud that everyone outside hears. Now, this is the second in command with a room full of people that everyone just assumes is some random Hebrews that are looking for grain. And they're hearing this wailing. You just think, man, I mean, he had his opportunity and yet he chose to cover.
He chose to cover. He says, verse 3, I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. What does the NIV say, the end of verse 3?
They were not able to answer him because they were terrified.
Terrified. It might have been time for a diaper change for some of them because they knew that they were standing before second in command. Yeah. They knew that their proper, what they deserved would have been death, imprisonment.
Absolutely.
They were terrified.
And in this moment, Scott, they're rehearsing everything about the silver cup and the bags of money and all the things that happened in the episodes leading up to this moment. Yeah. And now it's starting to click. Wait a minute. This is our brother. Wait a minute. Yeah. And so they just know, here it comes.
Here it comes.
Here it comes. And we deserve it.
They're about to get what they deserve.
Man.
The shock of shocks. Verse 4. So first point R.T. Kendall made is that you know you've forgiven when you no longer have to tell anyone what was done to you. Check this out, verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. They came closer and he said, I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into slavery. Kendall's second point, you'll know you're forgiven when you will not allow those that hurt you to be intimidated by you. I've got somebody in my life that I can think of right now. When I was pastoring a church, I spent more time with this particular person than any other time. I gave of myself to him. My wife and I sat with him and his wife, only to get a letter that I still have in my computer that I probably should just chuck away. That says, you were a fraud. You were a fraud. You're the worst pastor anybody could have had. Now, this is somebody that bro, he's not in my life.
Sure.
But if he came today and showed himself here, I'd just give him a piece of my mind.
Yeah.
I'd want him to fear.
Sure.
Yeah, you should be terrified, bro.
Because remember what you did.
Because remember what you did. But what does Joseph say? Man. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer. Man, bro, I have chills thinking about Jesus, whose brothers rejected him. And there's going to come a day when Israel looks on him whom they have pierced. Yeah. They're going to recognize, wait a second, you're the Messiah? What's Jesus going to do? Depart from me? No. Come closer. They're going to mourn as one mourns for an only begotten son. This is a remarkable disposition by Joseph.
It's staggering, and it shows his heart, right? Because if you think the way this whole thing started, his brothers despised him. It didn't say he despised his brothers. Mm-hmm. They despised him.
Yeah.
And then in their despising him, do these things to him that now he's had to work through despising them, you know?
Yeah.
But at the onset, he loves his brothers. Mm-hmm. In the onset, he's probably so elated that he gets to go check on his brothers out in the field. And man, he's the youngest. I get to add value. I get to help. I get to be on the team.
Yeah.
Right? And now here he is, the youngest. He's been hurt. He's been wounded. And yet he has an opportunity to say, come close. He's worked through the pain. He's worked through the rejection. And what's he concerned with? How's my dad?
Yeah.
Man.
How's my
dad? How is he doing, guys? I haven't gotten to see him. And this is what he's worried about. I mean, think about how powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing, bro. So Joseph said, come closer. They came closer. He said, I'm your brother Joseph, whom you sold into slavery. Verse 5. Do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. You know what we want to do? We want to remind people how they've hurt us and to say it was you You did this to me, you did this to me. But when we have the disposition of Joseph, we have the disposition of Jesus, you will not let them feel guilty. You'll call them to come closer, and then you'll actually point to God as being the one in control. Listen to this. God sent me before you. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years. There are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve you with a remnant for you, a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive. Verse 8, now therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all the household. This is so astronomical, because truly when we forgive, we can look at people who've hurt us, even when they don't apologize. Right. Do you see any of them saying, I'm sorry? No.
They're not acknowledging anything.
They're not acknowledging anything. But when the forgiver is standing in front of you, he disarms you and he says, it was God. It was God. It was God. And then it's interesting because at the end of Joseph's life, at the end of Israel's life, Joseph's father was dying. Yeah. At the end of his life in chapter 50 of Genesis, his brothers are like making this little kind of fibbing kind of story up. And Joseph says, listen, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about the present result. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And then Joseph dies. So here's the deal. You know you're forgiven when you don't need to trumpet what people have done, when you don't let them fear you. You call them closer to you. You point to God and said, what you meant for evil, God turned to good. And then forgiveness isn't just a one-time thing. It's forever. He said, I'm not only going to provide for you, but I'm going to provide for your children. The power of forgiveness, bro, is so huge. And I really want to encourage you. This is not something that comes naturally. Oh, you might say, I want to forgive, but I'm telling you, as soon as you say, I forgive, something's going to come up where you have reason to be more mad after you've forgiven than when you proclaimed forgiveness. And you actually find yourself living with bitterness or unforgiveness towards the people who hurt you. But I want to encourage you today that God desires for you to be walking in forgiveness. One of the greatest moments in my life was when the Lord literally ripped bitterness and unforgiveness out of my heart towards people who hurt me and hurt my family. And bro, I've never been the same. I have never been the same. I'm just reminded of this story of Corrie ten Boom. Do you care if I read it to you?
Please, yeah.
Corrie ten Boom hid Jews during the Holocaust in World War II. She and her family were then brought to a concentration camp where her entire family perished. She was the only one who lived. She was in this particular concentration camp in Ravensbrück with her sister Corrie, who wilted away and passed away. So Corrie ten Boom, after the Holocaust was over, was going around and speaking on God's forgiveness. Listen to this. It was in a church in Germany that I saw him. A balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. That's when I saw him working his way forward against the others. At one moment, I saw the overcoat and the brown hat. The next moment, I saw a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones, and it came back to me in a rush. The huge room with the harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking past this man naked. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, that was her name, how thin you were. Well, this picture that was coming back to her, Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. So he looks at her and he goes, "You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk," he was saying. "I was a guard there." No, he did not remember me. "But since that time," he went on, "I've become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things that I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fräulein." His hand came out. "Will you forgive me?" I mean, imagine this. This man who's responsible for the death of your sister and your family. "Will you forgive me?" I stood there, I whose sins had every day to be forgiven and could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed for hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who injured us. Scripture says, if you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart, but forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart.
Wow.
Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You must supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder and raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love as intensely as I did then. Here, this woman who had every right to hold this one up as the one who ultimately murdered her family is saying, I forgive you. What? Yeah. What's the Lord going to do when he sees Israel and they cry out to him? I'm sorry, you finish up.
Oh, God. Oh, man, I'm just having flashbacks of being with you at Yad Vashem in Israel and in the garden of the righteous Gentiles, and the trees that are planted, and seeing the tree for the Ten Boon family.
Yeah.
Just thinking, man, Joseph's story, the picture of recognizing it's bigger than just us. Corrie ten Boom having a revelation that it's not just about your circumstances, as heinous as they were.
Yeah.
Man, his name, right? His name is on the line, like it's for his name's sake.
Yeah.
We're trying to represent him in the earth, and he's the one who loves and forgives. And we don't have it in us. Joseph didn't have it in him, except that God gave him the gift to be able to do it.
He did.
And when Yeshua reveals himself to his brothers in the days to come, many look at him now, they see him as a Gentile. They don't think of him as being Jewish.
Right.
He looks like the Gentile church. He's the Messiah for the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And so many don't recognize him as their brother, right? And anyway, when they come to him, it says he recognizes them. Then he reveals himself. He forgives. He doesn't hold against. And he says, "Come close." And we're praying for that day. And in the meantime, we, as those who know him, have a responsibility to represent him well. And that's as we navigate difficult things, man, having the heart of redemption, having the heart of forgiveness, and being willing, like Corrie ten Boom, to be able to say, even if it feels mechanical, I love that part of it.
Yeah.
Mechanically putting her hand out there, like, Lord, you got to supply it. She took a step and God met her. And I believe the Lord wants to do the same in us.
Yeah, amen. Friends, if there are people out there that you're holding any kinds of bitterness or unforgiveness towards, you know that in your heart, I just want to encourage you, call out to God, because you're not capable in and of yourself of doing it on your own. It's the grace of God. He's looking for us to extend our hand and say, I forgive you. And then he'll provide you with all that you need to walk with a clean heart towards those who hurt you. And I do look forward to the day, Nathan, when Israel recognizes the greater Joseph, Jesus, when he reveals himself and when they look at him whom they have pierced. And that day when Romans says, all Israel shall be saved.